Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all this morning. I'll make a little adjustment here with this. Good morning to everyone who's here in person, and if you're here on Zoom, it's good to be with you this morning. If I haven't met you yet, I am Reverend Carol Bodeau. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am happy to see you here this morning. Westside is a place where we welcome different voices, different experiences, different perspectives. So this morning we're going to be talking about diversity, and there are a few announcements first. So announcement number one is that you will see over on that chair over there some clipboards with some pieces of paper on them. Those are surveys. These are available online as well, but they're surveys about the possibility of coming back in the building. The reopening committee is actually following in the footsteps of some of our other local congregations to ask the question, how do you all feel about this? Like, what's your level of risk comfort? How do you feel about these things? So you can fill that out online, but if you're not a person who would fill it out online, feel free to take one of the clipboards while you're here today, fill out that survey and drop it in the basket. If you are not yet on our sort of email, virtual reality email list, please let Brad know. Brad, raise your hand. Let Brad know so that he can get your emails and get you included in the things that we send out weekly. Another announcement, Picket. We were just having a very, very amusing conversation about Picket. Picket State Park, the first weekend in November, that's our annual church retreat. We are not renting the group area this year because of COVID, but we do have a lot of people coming up to Picket. So November 5th, 6th, 7th-ish, the Saturday is the 6th. So if you are interested in coming up, you can still get camping spots to do that. There are some lodges and areas in areas that are nearby that you could get a room in. Some people did lose their cabins. Picket has had some major failure to maintain some cabins, and so a bunch of the cabins have been canceled. So some people's cabins got canceled. There will be people driving up just for Saturday. We have a picnic pavilion, a covered picnic pavilion reserved for the whole day on Saturday. So you can come for the day and enjoy the activity. If you're going to do that, I need to know, not a hard and fast, I'll definitely be there. But if you're interested, I need to know so I have your email for the email distribution list so that everyone who's planning to be up there knows when to meet where and what to do about food and all those things. Okay, we have auction announcements. Anything else before we go to the auction announcements? All right, Suzanne has auction announcements.
Suzanne and Carol have auction announcements because Carol is really part of it. Auction is on. At this point, we could use a lot more donations. We have a couple of dinners, including Carol's famous drooled over farm to table dinners. I haven't been there. I've just heard from people. Oh, that was great. A wonderful childcare evening provided by Brad and Beth. You may not have little kids needing it, but you may know people who do it. It'd be the most fantastic gift to them, right? Because these people are saying, we will do whatever to make your kids happy this evening. But we need more of the kind of activities, and there's those two things are up for auction. There's a lot more tangibles that are displayed in the RE room if you want to, in the door, if you want to see where we are so far. It's also, it's planned to be auction. It's also planned to be party. Right? Carol is planning games, and that's why I want her to talk, because I don't know about that. There will be beer, there will be wine, there will be soft drinks. We're still trying to figure out what to do about food. My co-chair, Anne, is convinced that you have to feed people if you're going to have drinks. And I think, well, if they're serious about the drinks, you don't have to feed them. But yeah, we're figuring that out. There's other things being figured out. It is a week from Saturday, so 2 weeks from yesterday, 2 to 5. We have a tent rented from the Boy Scouts. So an enormous one, apparently. If it rains, it rains. Hopefully it won't, but it will still be on. What am I forgetting? I didn't bring a cheat sheet.
Oh, the theme. I can tell about the theme.
Yeah.
So thanks, Suzanne. So the theme is sort of Halloweenish and magical-ish because it's right before Halloween. It's the 23rd. It's Saturday the 23rd. So I think you guys called it Witches and Wizards or something like that. Yeah, but so the games are going to be so Halloweeny. Think Halloweenish. And the games are going to be taken from my version of summer camp teaching, for those of you who liked Hogwarts, right? The J.K. Rowling Harry Potter series of books. There are some wonderful games based on the 7 principles using kind of like magical themes. So one of them will be, for example, identifying the thing that scares you the most and figuring out what particular spell you would use to get rid of it. So there will be games, Halloween-ish style games rooted in the 7 principles. Trust me, I will make it fun. I'm seeing some faces like, what? That sounds really stupid, Carol. Like stupid. Okay, I promise there will be some fun. Okay. And food, please, food. I'm a big proponent of food. Let's have food. All right. Are there any other announcements? All right. Today we're talking about diversity. And we're actually talking not just about diversity, but how we match up our intentions with actual commitment to action. So it doesn't just apply to what we do here, Unitarian Universalism. It applies sort of to our lives as a whole. How do we match up our intentions with our commitments? This is a theme we usually talk about on New Year's, but it applies all year round. So as I invite the bowl to sound, I invite you to first and foremost become fully present in this moment. Notice the weight of your body. Just start with noticing that you're in a body, not just in your thoughts. Notice that you're in a body and that you're in a space where there is wind and air and sound and smells and other people and other creatures. Just notice yourself within the space. And then as I invite the bowl to sound, I invite you to just become centered in the part of yourself that knows what your intentions are. So we often think of Unitarian Universalism as being kind of a United States thing. Most of us don't think really often about how big the circle of Unitarian Universalism is. We have a tendency to think pretty locally when it comes to what's familiar to us. But actually, this is an international movement, and the chalice is one of the symbols that is used internationally. And the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists every year has a monthly like every month for many years, has had a global chalice lighting reading. So this is a reading that comes from somewhere around the world, from one of the other congregations. And we're invited to use this reading to remember the global nature of our movement. So before Beth and Ellie give us our global chalice lighting reading for today, I just want to remind us all of all the countries where Unitarianism, Universalism, and Unitarian Universalism, because it can be any of those three. There are congregations that are just Unitarian, and congregations that are just Universalist, and congregations that are both. These are all the countries by continent where we have congregations. Nigeria, South Africa, Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, Republic of the Congo, Tokyo, Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, Hong Kong, India, Australia, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Norway, Finland, Poland, Germany, England, France, Romania, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Amsterdam, and The Hague. So these words that Beth is going to read this week are offered by Dorothea Kaufmann of the Unitarian Religionsgemeinschaft Freien Glaubens, which is the Unitarians' religious community of free faith in Germany.
Good morning. From the bottom of my very existence, I'm pervaded with light energy, shining colors to my eye, warmth to my skin, inspiration to my soul. In this unity of creative sparks and sparkling creation, life unfolds. Let us open our senses to the light within and around us and send it out to the shining examples into the world.
Good morning. My name is Rita Lund, and my pronouns are she and her. I come before you today as a member of the Welcoming Congregation Renewal Program here at Westside to light a special candle in observance of Coming Out Day, which will be celebrated internationally tomorrow, October 11th. This is one of 6 days of observance that a member of the committee will remark upon during our current church year. To give some historical background and meaning to Coming Out Day, let me try to fill you in. First of all, coming out of the closet, now shortened to coming out, is a metaphor used to describe lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender people's self-disclosure of their sexual or their gender orientation. This is in large a psychological process or journey, which can be very risky, whether in terms of family and friend relationships, or limitation or loss of occupation. The peoples of the world have traditionally hewn to a binary division of their members. One is either male or female, and anyone who does not fit precisely into one mold or the other is prejudiced against, oppressed, probably even feared and disdained. Hence, a predominance of homophobic attitude. In terms of history, in 1979, there was a large political rally in Washington, D.C. that drew between 75,000 and 125,000 gay men, lesbians, bisexuals, transgender people, and their straight allies to demand equal civil rights and urge passage of protective civil rights legislation. After continued oppression, the second national march was held on October 11th, 1987, for lesbian and gay rights. This was called the Great March and included AIDS and bisexual activists and people of color as well. The number of people involved in the march itself was estimated at more than 500,000. Activities over a 6-day period included display of the AIDS quilt, an agenda demanding civil rights legislation for all non-binary people, regardless of race. Starting the next year in 1988, there has been annual recognition of October 11th as National Coming Out Day, it now having become international with recognition also by Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. The movement has also been subsumed into the Human Rights Campaign. Their logo is that royal blue square with two yellow bars representing an equal sign, which stands for equality. I suggest that we Unitarian Universalists have an obligation to counter this still prevailing homophobic attitude. The first principle of UUism is a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. To quote Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, our current UUA president, may we be grateful for the unseen but real threads of compassion and strength, care and intention that always surround us. We belong to each other. Now I say to you, let us all remember, each of us has worth and dignity, and that includes our gender and sexual orientations. Being welcoming means striving for diverse inclusions and creating spaces that honor every part of our identities, backgrounds, and experiences. The Welcoming Congregation Renewal Program is meant to divest us of homophobia and other phobias relevant to sexual and or gender identity. The work of welcome is never finished. This particular Welcoming Day observance, Coming Out Day, is to serve as a reminder that all of whom we are is sacred and all of whom we are is welcome. Again, I say, the work of welcome is never finished. I like this candle with a quotation from Ralph Waldo Emerson. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is a great accomplishment. Thank you.
So, we've talked so far this morning about a couple different kinds of diversity. The first being sort of cultural, global diversity, and then also identity diversity. And you all know that that's part of our values. That's part of our principles, that we encourage and honor diversity. But someone just said to me this morning, very explicitly, well, I wish we had more diverse people in our congregation. And that seems to be a central conundrum of our movement, doesn't it? Think about that for a minute. It has been a central conundrum of our movement for a very long time. We say we are the denomination that promotes and honors diversity, but we tend to be pretty homogenous, actually. So what's that about? Now, some of you who heard the sermon a couple of weeks ago will remember that we were talking about circles of care and concern. So we talked about how we have circles of relationship in our lives, and they sort of mirror the 7 principles, right? They start at our inherent worth and dignity, our relationship with ourselves and with other individuals. And then they spread outward to our relationships with close family and friends, and with our community, and with our nation and our world and the web of life, right? And I ask you all to just think about who's included in your circle and who or what is excluded from your circle. Right now, our denomination, which is the Unitarian Universalist Association, is asking us to think really deeply about how we commit to practices that help us actually be more inclusive, widen those circles. So last summer, some of you will have seen this book. I've held it up a couple of times before. Last summer, the denomination released this report. Okay, this is the result of a really long process of study and analysis. It's a report by a group called the Commission on Institutional Change. Now, okay, that sounds really dull and dry and boring, but the truth is what's in this report is actually really a very personal call. And it extends outside of what happens at church on Sunday or what we think about as like our commitment to Westside as an organization. So let me give you some background information about this. So the writing of this report came about as the result of a big hoopla in the denomination, which many people feel was a perfect demonstration of us having an intention to be diverse, but not really having the commitment to be diverse. So an intention is like a goal or a plan or a thing we say, yeah, we get behind that. But commitment is when you add accountability to your intention. I mean, think about that for a minute. How many intentions do you have? I have a billion, right? But how do they turn into actual commitments that we actually practice, that we actually carry through? One of the key components we need for our intentions to be lived as commitments and actions is accountability, which means we need the trainer at the gym to have us on their calendar, right? Like I was great at going to the gym when my trainer was like, I'll see you at 2. Not so good when I didn't have anyone to hold me accountable. So part of the purpose of community is accountability. So a few years ago, in the southern region here, which includes sort of, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Florida, Georgia, et cetera, in our denomination, the person who was the regional lead, the person sort of in charge of leading the denomination for our region, was retiring. So his position, he was a white man, his position was up for, people were applying for the job. The job was open. And a lot of people applied for that position. People of color from the South applied for that position, women of color, all kinds of people applied for that position, all of them very qualified. Now, the center of the Unitarian Universalist Association and its historical roots are in Boston. And it has kind of a reputation for being a bastion of the traditional. And the person that the denomination hired to replace the person retiring from the Southern region was not Southern, and he was not a person of color, and he was not a woman. They hired a white man from the North to run the Southern region. Just think about that metaphorically for a minute. It did not go over well. It did not go over well at all. As a matter of fact, it immediately resulted in an enormous outcry of like, where did this diversity thing go? Like, in what world do we think we're actually practicing our intention to promote diversity when that's what we do? So immediately the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, who happened to be white and male and Northern, he resigned immediately within a few days, promptly followed by a number of other people in the main office in Boston who also retired because they were like, okay, you're right, that was really bad. And what happened was actually a good thing after that. So immediately 2 interim presidents were put in place in the denomination. Both were African-American. One was Bill Sinkford, the Reverend Bill Sinkford, who had been a previous president, our first African-American president of our denomination, and a woman minister, an African-American woman, Reverend Sophia Betancourt. And they stepped in the interim for a couple of years. At the same time, the denomination also put in place 2 new co-moderators for our General Assembly and our political process, because the moderator or moderators runs sort of the political process. And the 2 people they put in place at that time were the late Alandria Williams, who many of us knew. She was a queer person, African-American person from the Tennessee Valley congregation. And Mr. Barb Grieve, a minister, a trans minister. So right away, the denomination said, we got to start acting like we mean it. And the first thing that Reverend Bill Singsford and Reverend Sophia Betancourt did was they called this Commission on Institutional Change. They said, okay, clearly there's some deep issues here. Let's figure out what's going on. So the commission set out to find out what the voices of diversity in the denomination thought and felt and what they were actually experiencing. Because the truth of the matter is, we at Westside have even had people of color and people of diverse backgrounds and diverse orientations show up, but they don't stick around. And so the question that the commission had to ask is, what's happening? What's happening? Why do we say we have this intention to be diverse, but the fact of the matter is we're pretty homogenous? What's happening? And the first response they got was from a bunch of the marginalized people, like people of color. So one of the terms you need to know is BIPOC, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The BIPOC people and the LGBTQ plus people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus people, they said, oh Lord, are we going to do this again? Every time you ask us, we go through these stories, we tell these really painful stories, and then you don't do anything. We've told you the stories, but so some of the people wouldn't answer the questions because they said, how many times do I have to tell this story? It hurts every time I tell it. I don't want to tell it again. But many people were willing to tell their stories. So they spent 2 years talking to people throughout the denomination, around the world, talking to particularly hearing the voices of people who fit in those marginalized categories to find out what's going on. And now this is one of my favorite parts about this process. They hired an outside social research firm to help with the data collection and data analysis, which is wonderful because it was a time when the people in the denomination said, we don't necessarily have this all figured out ourselves. We need someone non-biased who analyzes data to help us analyze this data. Okay. So this report is the result of that. And it came out last summer. And I'm going to tell you, I think some of you have heard me say this before, it's a pretty challenging call to us. It's a pretty challenging call to us. It says in a nutshell that we have to do a whole lot of things to live our values more fully and authentically. And it says first that there's some basic demographic trends we need to understand. All right. And one of those is that the statistics say that without a doubt, America and really the world in general is moving away from institutional religion. Churches are shrinking and disappearing across the world because fewer and fewer people feel the need to be part of a church. And those that do are generally looking for something a little different than what people were looking for in the past. Our national demographics, in addition to this second, our national demographics here in the US have changed dramatically. And I'm about to throw another word out at you that you need to know. The demographics require a much higher level of cultural competence. Okay? Cultural competence is understanding. I'm going to read you a definition of it here. It's understanding and being willing to live in a way and act in a way that honors and respects other cultures. Cultural competence, this is one definition, and this is the one that's on the UUA's website. It's by Reverend Pope Davis. Actually, there's a whole bunch of people listed. I'm not going to read the whole list. The characteristics of a person with multicultural competence is that they have an appreciation of and sensitivity to the history, current needs, strengths, and resources of communities and individuals who historically have been underserved and underrepresented in our association. All right. So I'm already throwing stuff out at you that's actually a level of commitment. Like we can say, I want to Be encouraging of diversity. You got to know what BIPOC is. You got to know what LGBTQ plus is. And cultural competence means understanding your own biases and acknowledging them. Knowing information about other cultures. Being willing to make an accurate self-assessment about your own cultural competence. Being willing to apply that knowledge appropriately in actual settings and also in how you run your institution. The ability to make cultural norms visible and to create structures that's actually inclusive. So not just say it, but actually change the structure of things. So if we're doing this, we're listening and behaving without imposing our values on others. So that means we're not making a judgment. We have an attitude of respect when we're approaching people of different cultures, which means self-assessment and self-critique, and the ability to move beyond our biases, and being able to communicate in a way that's based not on being argumentative or competitive or trying to prove we're right. This is tricky for UUs because we are masters of the argument. Our denomination is asking us to fundamentally change a cultural ethos of intellectual competitiveness. I want all of us to sit with that. I mean, I started reading this report a year ago, and it is a difficult thing to sit with. Think about how much of our identity is caught up in being intellectually right. It's a lot. Being able to maintain communications, not in being argumentative or competitive, or trying to wear people down with evidence. It's about listening and hearing something that's profoundly different than what you understand. Okay, it's a challenge. And there's some pretty strong language in the report about how essential this action is going to be for us as a denomination. Taking hard, like serious action on matters of racial justice, countering white supremacy, and centering the voices of people who've been marginalized. So one person that they interviewed for the report, I love this. This is what they said. They said, we need people who are actively engaged in this work, not just cheerleading from the side. I have to admit that I've spent a lot of time cheerleading. I know that. I know that about myself. The commission summarizes, this is a direct line from the report, summarizes its findings by saying, our deliberations to date have convinced us of this. What is at stake is nothing less than the future of our faith. So the bottom line is people come into our congregations, and the deal is that for younger generations of people, they are certainly looking for community, but they're also looking for something more engaged and more embodied in large part. And also, younger generations have a higher level of cultural competence than older generations because cultural competence is constantly changing. So your average high schooler has heard the phrase LGBTQ+, and has friends who are part of that. And like, for them to know someone who's a trans person is just not, the average young person has a much broader experience of that than most of us. So their cultural competence, because they're on the internet and they're tweeting and they're on Instagram and whatever, right? Cultural competence is much higher. So those people come into our congregations and they see our intentions, and then they're like, but somebody just got mad at me because I asked them to use their pronouns. Like, someone just got mad because I said, hey, that's not my pronouns. And they're like, but you said your intention was to be inclusive, but then you got mad at me. So, and there's all kinds of examples of that. We've had African-American and other BIPOC people come into our congregation and be mystified by our behaviors. There's a lot of different examples. We have a whole book to talk about it. And it's not that we're bad people. One of the biggest problems we have as UUs is that we think judgment is the best possible solution to fixing things. And that gets us in terrible trouble because then we feel defensive. It makes it really hard to assess our own patterns. How do we do elections? How do we choose who runs a committee? How do we do worship? What kind of music do we use? Like, those are things we could have self-assessment around. But we tend to either feel like either we're right or we're wrong. And we don't want to be wrong, because then we feel shame and we get defensive. And that gets us in trouble because it makes it hard for us to expand. So this would be really easy to look at as a rule book of what we're doing wrong. And I will admit that when I look at it, I kind of think that the denomination is maintaining one of its habits and patterns and doing that, giving us a rule book and telling us how we're wrong, which I don't think is particularly helpful. But the title of it, Widening the Circle of Concern, is really helpful. So how can we think of this not as failures? Oh, we're messing up. Oh, we're bad. We failed. I know that when I talk to my parents about their own church, and what they say to me is, they say to me, no one appreciates what our generation did. You know, you all think you should change everything. So I'm like, I hear, and that it doesn't matter what age you are or how long you've been in a movement, it's easy to feel that way. So instead of thinking of this as being criticized and penalized, it might be helpful to think about this as growing and widening so that we can continue to thrive, right? So we have this saying at Westside. We say that we are the church of warm hearts, open minds, and caring hands. Right? You've seen the kids do it. Warm hearts, open minds, caring hands. How do we widen the circle of concern to have wider hearts, wider minds, and greater outstretch in our hands? How do we do that? So I'm going to summarize a few things in the report that it's asking us to do. So it asks us to expand our minds by including new ideas and new information and new perspectives that feel uncomfortable, that are new, that aren't what we're used to. They don't make sense to us. That's the challenge. If it already makes sense to you, it's not expanding. It's only expanding if it's actually new. That's tricky. It asks us to think differently about white privilege and socioeconomic advantage, and to expand the range of voices and perspectives we take seriously. So, for example, that might mean using different kinds of music or worship materials. This morning on the drive here, my practice this morning was listening to praise music from the Christian radio station, which I love and think is awesome, right? And I thought as I was listening to it, oh, what would the congregation think if I played this morning, right? Right? Opening our minds to things that aren't familiar to us, all right? It means inviting different kinds of speakers and topics to our conversations and the pulpit, and challenging ourselves to read books and watch movies that make us uncomfortable. We need to ask ourselves whose visions we prioritize, whose histories we focus on, and whose perspectives we highlight. Specifically, it asks us to make a conscious effort to center the voices, stories, and perspectives of people who've been marginalized. And here's the catch. It asks us to do that unequally. It asks us to center the voices that have been marginalized, not just include them. It literally asks us to step out of the center and put other people in the center, even if they say stuff we don't understand, even if they say it in a way that's bad grammar. There's been a big debate on the Tennessee Valley communication thread lately about grammar and whether or not it's okay to correct other people's grammar, right? So stuff like that. All right, so that's the mind part. The heart part, it asks us to open our hearts by going outside of our emotional comfort zone. to actually expand outside our comfort zone, which means thinking with humility about things we instinctively want to be defensive about, like habits of language, habits of ritual, habits of gathering. It means being willing to hear someone tell us that the way we're doing things hurts them. We don't have to, nobody has to be right or wrong. It can just be like a covenantal conversation that says, where someone says, ouch. Instead of saying, we say, oh, okay, I hear you, right? There's been a lot of practice of this on the Thursday evening adult RE discussion. This group has been practicing this actively. It means being willing to hold one another accountable and be held accountable. So that's living in covenant where so for example, I need to be okay when someone says, you to me, and they have. You keep forgetting to say your pronouns at the beginning of the service. For someone who is non-binary, if the service opens with, hi, I'm the minister and my pronouns are, that person is so much more likely to come again. They're so much more likely to tune in next time to listen because they know that I actually care how they feel about pronouns. It's not about how I feel about pronouns for myself. It's showing relational care and comfort, even though it might make me uncomfortable. I care that it hurts them or that they care. It means being willing to hold one another accountable for racial justice and equity things, for other kinds of ways we do things, right? So that might mean ways that people observe us engaging in white privilege, which we all do because we can't help it, because we're white people in Farragut. There's no way to get around it. We're white people in Farragut. We don't have to like it. We can feel that instinctive feeling in our gut that says, I want to fight that. I don't want to be that person. It just is, it's true. So we need to be okay hearing that and going outside our comfort zone in our emotions, okay? And our actions. We're being asked to expand our practices by stretching out the boundaries of who we actually relate to. Now, one of the ways you use typically, we'll do this, is they'll say, well, let's invite a speaker. And that's a good start. But the truth of the matter is, it's really about building relationships that make us uncomfortable and require a commitment. So it's a little bit of a commitment to bring in a speaker for an occasional talk. That's a little commitment. We're pretty good at that. But what would it mean to have a partnership with an organization that held us accountable for our commitment to do racial justice work? Like, what would it mean? Think about it. If you've got a partner or a family member or a friend, they hold you accountable for stuff. You say, I'm going to take the garbage out, and then you don't do it. And they're like, excuse me, there's still garbage in the house. Whatever it is, right? We hold each other accountable. That's kind of annoying. It can be frustrating. It takes work and energy. Imagine if instead of just having someone come in for an hour on a Sunday, we actually had a partner, a relational partner, an organization that we committed to be in relationship with, that held us accountable. So one of the things the report tells us is that congregations in the US specifically that are succeeding, who are not having the conversation every spring, oh no, are we gonna have a big enough budget? Are we gonna have to close? The congregations that are thriving are the ones that are doing that. The congregations that are thriving are the ones that are making these kinds of commitments because people want to get on board with that. People want to show up and be on board with that. So the report stresses that we need to be what they call more theological. So just sit with that for a second. Ask yourself how that word makes you feel, that we need to be more theological. And here's what it means. It means that we need to be less philosophical and more morally imperative driven. So to be philosophical means we're just thinking about it and having thoughts, which is like intentions. To be theological, there's a moral imperative behind that, right? One of the most powerful statements in the report is this: acknowledgement of anti-oppression work as a theological mandate is essential. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we feel accountable for? A theological mandate means there's something that's holding us accountable. Now, we don't all agree on what that is. But the other thing the report says is, remember that faith and covenant are not dirty words. We have a tendency to hear the word faith and instantly think, ugh, that's not what we do. But we didn't define faith in what, right? Or covenant. So what this boils down to is this, and I'm really trying to help us understand the core of the urgency of the report. We are not a philosophical thinking club. The world with the internet and meetups and virtual rooms doesn't have as much of a call for philosophical thinking clubs as it used to. And we definitely are pressurized to not be a club where people who agree with one another get together to feel good about agreeing with one another. We're too diverse a culture now. There are people who agree with a lot of UU values and principles with our intentions who don't look the same, who are really different than who usually shows up at a UU congregation. That's challenging for us. We're a faith tradition with a long commitment to moral theological values that frankly require us to keep transforming. All right. So think about Unitarian Universalism. Every time you look back in history, doesn't matter what moment in UU history you look at, somebody said we shouldn't make that change. Or a lot of somebody said we shouldn't make that change, right? Because the nature of Unitarian Universalism is to be cutting edge. And unfortunately, what that means is the second we get comfortable, we need to get uncomfortable again. So comfort in our denomination is a resting place, but not a stopping place. We constantly have to be widening the circle, widening the way we think, widening our comfort zone, reaching a little further. Okay. So that's challenging, right? It's not the first time I've said it, but here's what this report and the denomination is asking us to consider. They know that that's not an easy request. Many of us come on Sunday morning or attend a discussion or a group because we're stressed out by the world and we want comfort and we want to rest and we need reassurance. And that is 100% legitimate. 100% legitimate. But we abide, I think I said this 2 weeks ago, Unitarian Universalism abides in that zone between stretching and straining. I use the comparison to like yoga or athletics, right? There's a place when you're stretching your body, where you're stretching and you're growing and expanding, where your muscles are getting more expansive, you're becoming more flexible. And then there's a point just past that where it's harm, where you strained and you've gone too far. So our denomination lives right in the zone of the stretching. So it's really important to rest. And it's really important to know when to stretch and how to stretch. It's important to know what your injuries are, right? It's important to know your limitations. So there's actually a whole process built into this to help congregations decide if and how they want to try some of these practices. And it's kind of set up as an adult RE curriculum where people get together from the congregation and they do some self-assessment that says, where are we? How do we feel about this? How ready are we? And then you decide from there what the next step is. So it would be a mistake for me to stand up here and say, okay, we're going to get a new partner and you're all going to have to start to use pronouns and this is going to be enforced. That is absolutely not how it works. Instead, it works by us saying, wow, how did we feel about that sermon? What got triggered for me? Where did I feel upset? What kind of comfort do I need? And talking to each other about it. Talking to each other about it. We have to decide whether or not and how we as a community want to expand and grow. And you can only expand and grow from where you are. So what I'm going to invite us to do, first, I'm going to invite anybody who is willing to take a look at the report, right? The whole report is online. So when the report first came out, they had paper copies of it and they sold out in like a month. So the commission said, hold on a minute, this is an accessibility issue. We're not being very welcoming. We need to widen our circle. Not everybody can afford to buy the book. So then they posted the whole report online. So you can go online and you can skim through it. You can read the sections, right? So that's something you could do. You can talk to each other at lunch or when you're hanging out with your friends. And you can say, I'm so mad at Carol. I wish she'd, or whatever. Or you can say, wow, this really stirred me deeply. Or I feel really, whatever it is. And you can choose when we set this up in a couple of months to participate in those congregational conversations. The whole year this year, the worship team is committed to us widening our circle of concern. So there are going to be services where you hear voices of all kinds of people we don't usually include. You know, trans Black activists and people who you wouldn't ever see in our midst on a Sunday morning, right? People of different cultures, people of different religions. You're going to hear a lot of different voices, and we're going to try to be practicing widening our circle. And I would invite you to consider thinking about how you can widen your own circle. Where's your stretching edge and where's your straining edge? Just begin to become aware of that. I also invite you to not hesitate to send me an email or call me or tell me today that you want to talk about it, because I think conversations about this are really important. Last but not least, think about the difference between your intentions and your commitments. Accountability doesn't have to be mean. Accountability, I'm going to say that again. Accountability doesn't have to be mean. It can be love. We can be loving, holding ourselves and one another accountable. And I think that's what we mean when we say warm hearts, open minds, and caring hands. We mean love. And there are ways we can do that in that stretching zone. So something for you all to think about, something for us all to talk about. And now, as we prepare to end our time together, I'm going to invite you to stretch yourself a little bit. Close your eyes. Focus your attention. If you prefer to keep your eyes open, just focus your attention somewhere that makes you comfortable. And imagine yourself in a circle. Like, think of it as a bubble. Your own personal bubble. And inside that bubble, you are completely safe. Okay? You can fill it up with light or color or the smell of flowers or pumpkin pie baking or whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable. Feel yourself inside that circle that is your space where you feel safe and comfortable. And just notice how far out it goes, how close it is to your body, or how far out it goes. And I invite you to just spread it just a little bit wider. Make it just, a few inches or a few feet bigger. And now as you do that, while you're still inside your bubble, become aware of the other bubbles around you. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all that we love. There is a love holding us. We rest in this love. Carry that with you, the knowledge that you have your own safe space, that everyone else does too, but that we are together in the journey, all of us. We extinguish the chalice, but not that warmth of community, that love. The light of truth that we choose to shine further and further into the world, and the fire of commitment to live our values fully. Go in peace.